Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Annise Mabry. I'm the founder of the Dr. Annise Mabry Foundation. Now, some of you started following my story from my show, Trouble Next Door, that aired on the Oprah Winfrey Network in 2012. What I left out of my story when it aired in 2012 is that I was in bounce back mode. I had lost everything that I thought was important to me. Today, I'm here to share my number one secret on how to bounce back stronger from a setback. So my story really starts in 2010. I was at the top of my game. I was the youngest and the first African American lesbian to be selected as Dean of Graduate Studies for DeVry University. My dad and I had just purchased one of our newest real estate flips, and we kind of decided that this was really going to be our last flip together. Not because we didn't enjoy flipping real estate investment properties, but my dad really wanted to retire. And while I loved flipping properties, I only loved it because I was doing it with my dad. So what made this property unique was it was actually the first property that we ever bought that was move-in ready. It didn't need a lot of work, and we would be able to get it back on the market in 6 months. We decided to do something with this property that we'd never done with any of the flips before, and we decided that I would actually move into this property with my children and live there while we were doing the renovations. Because that's always a good idea, right? The other thing about this property is by the time we got to the closing table, the property had already appraised for more than $100,000 of the price that we had bought it for. So my daughter was entering middle school, my son was entering kindergarten. I had already been given full physical custody of the kids, so I was in the middle of a divorce, but I wasn't having to fight for custody, and that was huge. I thought everything was good, and then it wasn't. My daughter had been begging me to homeschool her since she was in the 3rd grade, but I always kept telling her, I'm not qualified to be your teacher. Even though I had taught in the public school system, even though I had a master's and a PhD in education. Let that sink in for a moment. I taught in the public school system. I had a master's and a PhD in education, but yet I'm telling my own child that I'm not qualified to be her teacher as a homeschool parent. I felt like I wasn't qualified to teach my own child. Even though I was designing classes in the School of Education, teaching teachers how to teach, and I was a national online trainer that taught university professors how to teach online classes, I felt that I wasn't qualified to homeschool a 3rd grader. So our mornings were, I guess I could describe them as hectic at best. I would get her up, send her out to school. And, she was an amazing student though, because never once did I know that there was anything wrong. She went to school every day. She did her homework. Her grades weren't slipping. I wasn't getting calls from school. And that's probably why I never noticed her pain, because for most children, a decline in schoolwork is the first indication that something is wrong. But for her, nothing changed. My dad was also diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease around this time. That was hard. So, my daughter was about to take me into a tailspin. The one person that had been my staunchest supporter, I was losing a little bit every day. The first time my daughter attempted suicide, I was sitting downstairs doing an audit of online classes for a student who filed an appeal because he didn't like how a professor had graded some of the discussions. I had my messenger on when I got a message from one of my daughter's friends telling me that my daughter had taken an overdose. There were 14 steps between downstairs and her room. By the time I arrived in her bedroom, she was laying horizontal across the bed. Her eyes were closed. I picked up her wrist. Her wrist went limp. I screamed, but there was no one there to help me. My son was in school, but even if he had been there, I don't even know if he could have called 911 because no one outside of the family could understand him when he talked. I took a deep breath and I called 911. 911, I have a 13-year-old female, overdose, suicide attempt, weak pulse, labored breathing, unconscious. Go ahead and start an ambulance and rescue and I gave them my address. In the 10 seconds that it took me to make that phone call, my training as an emergency 911 dispatcher kicked in as I went from a mom who had just found her daughter horizontal on the bed from an overdose to a first responder. When they arrived and took her to the hospital, the first agonizing wait came from them letting me know that she was stable. The second agonizing wait was for them to locate an adolescent healthcare bed for her. Because what I didn't know at the time was in Georgia, there's actually a crisis in adolescent mental health care because there's a shortage of beds for kids when they are mentally unstable. Now, it would have been one thing if this suicide attempt would have been her last, but it wasn't. My daughter attempted suicide 13 times in 12 months. She completed 6 inpatient stays at 3 different adolescent mental health care facilities. With each suicide attempt, I felt her slipping farther and farther away from me. About this same time, I got the diagnosis that my son had Asperger's disorder and written expression language disorder. The final blow, though, it came when we found out that I had chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy, a progressive neurological disorder that really has no cure, only treatments, that was going to slowly eat away at my body and my ability to be present for my children. I was left with no choice but to take medical leave of absence from my job. Have you ever had that moment where it feels like your life is imploding in itself? And I mean, literally, this was happening to me overnight. What I didn't know at the time was every time I sent my daughter back into the school that the kids were bullying her even more. They would spit in her food at lunch, and the only place that my child found safety was in the bathroom. I was determined to make the administration at that school create a safe place for her and a safe space for her. What I realized is it wasn't their job. It was not their job to create a safe space for her because they had already shown me that they were incapable of performing that job. So the job of creating a safe academic learning space for my child fell to me. It was my job. That was my responsibility. When she started getting into fights at school, that was really the final straw, because the school called me and told me that they were going to send her into the juvenile justice system because she had knocked out another student's permanent molar. I remember looking at the principal and the school resource officer, and I said, if you plan on arresting my child, I hope you got more than one pair of handcuffs that I see on your duty belt, and I truly hope that you have more patrol cars than that single patrol car that I saw sitting in the little parking lot, because I'm going to need charges pressed against the principal who created an environment that fostered this type of behavior. And then I'm also going to need charges pressed against the teacher who left a classroom of 26 kids unsupervised while she went to Taco Bell to pick up lunch. This teacher had full knowledge that this was a toxic classroom, and she left them unsupervised. So essentially what she did was she created an environment that threw my daughter into the wolves. The resource officer and I looked at each other, and I'm in law enforcement, and there's a saying that We are our sisters and brothers' keepers, that we protect each other, that we look after each other's children. But in that moment, I was a lone wolf. I was the enemy. That day in the principal's office, I put my arm around my daughter and I told her it was never their job to keep you safe. I'm sorry. I failed you. But I promise you that I'm going to step up and do my job, because it's my job to make sure that you're safe. It's my job that you have the tools that you need to succeed academically in an environment that's right for you. It's my job as your mother. We walked out of the school that day and we never looked back. But to keep her safe, it was going to mean that I was going to have to implode a box on which I had built my entire academic career. And I was scared. To say that I was scared is an understatement. But when you're in the fight of your life as a single parent with 2 special needs children in tow, you live by one principle and one principle only, and that is you show up, even if it means showing up scared. I showed up scared when I demanded that she receive hospital homebound services for the remainder of the year. I showed up scared when I put her in the private school the next year, only to be told, come pick her up, never bring her back. This isn't working for us. I showed up scared when I realized that I was going to have to build a full homeschool program just to help her get a high school diploma. I showed up scared when I sat in my son's IEP meeting and announced that I was taking him out of school to homeschool him too. I showed up scared when everyone sitting in that meeting doubted me, and I held firm. I held firm because I saw what this district had done to my daughter and how they broke her, and I was determined they would never have that opportunity to do that to another child in my presence, in my privilege, and in my home. I was determined that no matter what, I was going to show up scared. But you know what I learned from showing up scared? I learned that failure wasn't an option. It's like my aunt used to always tell me when she was trying to teach me to sew, you measure twice to cut once. I had to build an academic program that could not only help an elementary student with a diagnosis of written expression language disorder, but also a high school student who had a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder and PTSD, all while managing my own health crisis. So I took everything that I knew about designing online classes and I poured it into designing an online high school program for a student who was medically fragile, as well as an elementary program for a student with a lot of language gaps. The program had to have rigor and flexibility. I had to be able to control the content and the pace. But I also needed to have additional levels of support built into the classes that I knew I wasn't really good at, like math and science. What I ended up building was a program that not only saved my own children, but is now being used in police departments, in a jail, and has even won the Dr. McClung Award from the Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police. This program has provided a high school diploma to more than 300 people who didn't have a high school diploma. My oldest high school graduate has been 56 years old, and my youngest graduate was my then 16-year-old daughter in 2015. 46% of the students who graduate from my program, Tears Free Academy, attend college, and 81% are employed in jobs that pay a living wage. 46% of my graduates attend college. That may not seem like a large number to anyone else, but remember, all of my graduates, all of my students are homeless LGBTQ youth, sex trafficking survivors, and high school dropouts. That means a year before they got to me, they didn't have a high school diploma, but now 46% of them are going to college. Failure wasn't an option for me. And it's not an option for you either. We're in a pandemic right now, and the landscape of K-12 education, it's been forever changed. As a parent, you knew that some of the demands of the remote learning schedule was just too much for your child. But you did it anyway, because you felt that you didn't have any other option. Or maybe you knew that it wasn't in the best interest of your child for them to return to in-person learning, but your district didn't give you any other option, so you sent them anyway. When you put your children into public or private school, you're literally handing over control of your child's academic future to someone with the hopes that that person that you're giving the control to would do the right thing. Let me ask you this. Would you put your child into a car with a complete stranger that you knew nothing about and hope that that stranger got your child safely to the destination where your child was supposed to be? But that's what you do every time that you put your child into an academic environment that you don't have any control over. You hand over that control. What would it look like if you took that control back? What would it look like if you could create a learning environment that actually fit your child, not an environment that your child had to fit into? As a parent or a guardian, you have that power. You don't have to fight with the school district to accommodate your child. You just got to show up scared, take your child, and walk away. Walk away from a system that hasn't been redesigned for more than 100 years. Think about that. The education system in the United States has not been redesigned in over 100 years. Now let me ask you this. Do you see anything today that's operating exactly the same way that it was 100 years ago and is still working? You don't see 100-year-old cars driving on the interstate today. You know why? Because they can't keep up. They're obsolete. Now, I want you to grab a piece of paper and I want you to write down what you want your child's academic journey to look like. I want you to be so specific, down to the courses that you feel that your child should actually have included in their education. Things that you always say, I wish that they taught this in public school, or I wish we could do more of that, or I wish my child had an opportunity to. All of this goes on your paper. Then, I want you to take this same blank piece of paper, or not the same blank piece of paper, give your child another blank sheet of paper and ask your child what your child wants school to look like. Ask your child what time would they like for their school to start. Do they want school to start in the morning or do they want school to start in the afternoon? Ask your child what subjects do they want to spend more time learning and what subjects are kind of hard. And even if your child has dropped out of school, send your child a text and say, hey, have you ever thought about what you would do if you had your high school diploma? I don't care if your child is 26, 30, 40. I don't care how old your child is. If they don't have a high school diploma, send them a text and ask your child that question. And then what I want you to do is take all of this information, because what your child just gave you is a blueprint for academic success. And then I want you to use that blueprint to build your own homeschool program for your child. Wait, notice I said build for your child. I didn't say go out here and build a school for other children. I didn't say go out here and build a program for other children. I said build a program for your child with the blueprint that your child gave you. But I'm not just going to leave you there with building the blueprint. I'm going to invite you to reach out to me because I'd love to hear your story. And if your child is over the age of 18 and has dropped out of school and is ready to get that high school diploma, reach out to me. I would love to help make that a reality too. Your story of how you showed up scared and became your own box breaker, that's the next chapter. I want to invite you to reach out to me because I want to hear your story of how you showed up scared. I only gave you part of my story today, but I'm actually writing a book with my daughter for the first time This is the first time that she and I are sharing our story together in the same space. But this isn't just a book about me and my daughter. My students and some of my graduates are also sharing their stories too. The book is called The Box Breakers, and it's going to be released at the end of March 2021. And again, I am Dr. Annise Mabry. I'm the founder of the Dr. Annise Mabry Foundation, and I would love to help you break the box that's keeping your child in an unsafe or unfit academic learning environment.